Good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to welcome all of you here today to really talk about what I think is the most important issue that we all face today, frankly, in Latin America, but that extends to the United States and many other places around the world, which is really the skills gap. It touches on so many different things. It touches on education, it touches on training, it touches on what happens when an economy grows faster than the educational system and the training systems and the infrastructure can support. So for us to be focused on a topic, Chris has been focused on this in America's Quarterly, not just in this edition, but many times. For us to be addressing this on an ongoing basis, which we have been, I think is really critical because it is addressing what is most important in the hemisphere. Before we begin, I'd like to give a very special welcome to our speakers, Peter Deschasso, Executive Director of LASPAO, Sam Foy, who is America's emerging markets leader at Ernst & Young, but I like to think of him as a council board member instead. It's easier. Diana Lard, Global University Hiring Programs Leader at IBM, and Diego Bustamante, the 2014 graduate candidate and LASPO Fulbright Scholar. And I also want to thank our partner for today's event, LASPO. And most of all, I want to thank Chris. He and his team have organized this, and he will be the chair of today's panel. And I want to welcome everyone that's here, but also we're webcasting this event, so I also want to welcome everybody that's joining us by webcast, and of course our webcast sponsor, Telefonica. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. I'm assuming we're going to also be able to take questions through Twitter and webcast as we go through the program as well, which is a new feature and, frankly, really cool. So with that, Chris, I look forward to a rich discussion. I pass it to you.
Thanks, Susan. As Susan mentioned, this is a topic that is really of importance to us at many different levels. I think at a personal level, my team and the team around Susan and others, believe deeply in sort of the idea of job growth, of innovation and entrepreneurship, meritocracy. And I think it's important also more and more when we talk to our members, Council of America's members in Latin America, and we hear them talk about the need to get qualified, skilled labor. So when Peter, who's a friend from when we were both in DC, proposed the idea of having LASPAO come to talk about some of his programs, I thought it was a great idea because we could easily fill out a panel with very thoughtful leaders in industry who can talk about what they do and the challenges they face in trying to recruit talented staff to meet genuine job demands in Latin America. And it's that sort of gap between the offer of talented skills and talented labor pool and the demand that investors are frequently finding, which has presented a real constraint both on sort of unemployment but also on competitiveness in the region. So I look forward to a good discussion. And what we'll do is I'm going to arrange this a little bit as a Davos discussion, and we're going to bring in actually an example of a LASPAO program, Diego Bustamante, who's here from Colombia and is sort of a beneficiary of this. But what I wanted to do first is sort of talk a little bit with our private sector leaders about, and I'll start with Sam because we discussed this yesterday, and then I'll turn to Deanna. A little bit of, Sam, you advise companies on everything about growth. Right over there. Okay. Okay, sure. On growth, on of course, taxes, but also on sort of investment opportunities, and sort of you've seen the boom. Explain a little bit sort of what you see and what you see in terms of their hiring practice and how they can improve them.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I would start against the backdrop that Susan provided around the changing global dynamics and the roles throughout the Americas, and particularly here Latin America, by saying the recognition that people are a critical element of a business's success and its strategy is evolving in and of itself. So whether you start in the north and the West and work your way south and east, you'll find that trend in and of itself is evolving and hasn't in Latin America really taken hold. So you'll see very few businesses that will put people at the heart or at the front of their strategy, and the demands usually of a CEO that has an interest in this issue, but cascading that throughout the organization as an imperative is where I would start. I think if you add to that the biggest changing dynamic in the demands of businesses are that rather than simply serving the needs of large businesses coming from, again, the North and the West, investing in emerging markets like Latin America, what we see is tremendous growth of the businesses, whether they're large or middle-sized businesses in the markets, in this case of Latin America, and their needs of those businesses to be successful not only in their own national markets, but increasingly international and looking regionally or hemispherically, or in some of their cases, a few of them even going global. That's against a backdrop, keep in mind, of countries that have had traditionally weak and underfunded educational systems at all levels, and particularly expensive and inaccessible systems at the higher education level, and a mindset in the governmental regulatory framework that was traditionally quite protectionist and nationalistic. So for these markets to now be needing very internationalized, growth-oriented, high skills-based talent is a tremendous challenge in that context. So what are businesses doing to adapt successfully? They are looking at the best practices around the world and trying to adopt those. And so whether you're, and I'm sure my colleague from IBM can comment on this, whether you're taking a global practice and trying to adopt it and bring it into markets like these and having to customize or adapt to the realities and the practicalities of getting that done, or whether you're a fast-growing Brazilian or Colombian or Chilean company who all of a sudden needs to marshal talent in a new way. These are very, very stretched objectives. So being practical around what can be done, allowing customization, because part of today's reality is also that the truths we've held as self-evident around best practices need to be revisited around what is the best mix of sensitivities and practices, whether those are on the objective, quantifiable side or the softer, if you will, culturally diverse or sensitive things. So I know that's a lot to start with, but I think that's some of the dynamic we're dealing with. And so advising businesses or being successful in your own business needs to be against that backdrop of challenges and opportunities.
Let me ask one quick follow-up, specifically in sort of the skills that you've noticed that are most in demand, companies you advise, but also your own, of course. What would you say are sort of the most premium skill sets that companies are looking for? Obviously language, but what else?
Language is critical, and just to compare, for example, if you look at the development of China, and I was heavily involved in the evolution of the Chinese market over the last number of years, and the skills development of language, English language speaking in China in the last 15 years was phenomenal. You do not see that same exponential increase in English language capabilities in other markets around the world, including Latin America. So I think there's an important notion here of understanding the difference just in language absorption or development, and a particular challenge, for example, in Brazil. But to answer your question specifically, I think the skills that are generally needed are increasingly internationally recognized skills. So you have businesses have been far more globalized quickly than, say, governments and governmental regulators, and then educational institutions. To my colleagues from the educational institutions, I would say the patchwork of relationships of educational institutions are personal, they're not institutional. And so the ability to whether it's mobility within educators within Latin America, for example, not to mention globally, or just consistency in content that's being delivered across educational systems is a tremendous challenge. So what happens is private institutions step in and deliver much of that themselves. So we, for example, have the leading corporate university in Brazil, and even for us, learning is only one component of the learning and development agenda, and it should be the easiest place, but you will find us and many other businesses supplementing what the private, increasingly private, and somewhat public institutionals, educational systems in these countries are providing, because that globally consistent technical knowledge is not getting delivered, much less how to apply it.
Thank you. Just so you know, no one is protesting skills development outside. And if you are here to rail against the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, you're in the wrong place. You belong out there. God bless them, though. I just want to say that. Deanna, from your perspective as a recruiter, what do you find globally in terms of the skill patterns, also across regions?
Sure. Well, I'll first start off to reiterate that I agree that, in companies, certainly in IBM, the value of the people, the employees, is so critical to success for business. And we have certainly felt it, as we have transitioned our company over the years, and certainly as we have moved into the services market more and more, it's core and it's critical. I think one thing that's interesting and what makes it a difficult environment is that the speed of change, and which then results in a need for flexibility and also evolving skills. So as our technologies and the world is changing so quickly, it also demands that people and the skills of those individuals and capabilities of those individuals change as well, whether it's the external market, those that we're looking to hire, our internal employees. We have to stay up to speed. So that means we as a company do, and academic institutions do as well. And so partnering, I think we try to partner with academic institutions to say, here's what we need, and let's help work together to ensure that we're developing those skills. But lo and behold, after a few years, it's a continuous process to have that look and that review to make sure that we all stay up to date.
Give me a sense also then of sort of in terms of how you partner with corporations and what sort of skill sets you're looking for in these cases.
Certainly. So some of the skill sets that we look for and where we seem to find a gap in or a need in is around, the big area now of analytics, so business analytics, optimization, and those skills in employees. Also the social world. A lot of our work with our clients is around building out that business capability in the social environment. And so, obviously it's evolving as we speak, and so those skills are new and evolving, and they're sometimes very difficult to find. Similarly, cloud computing as well. So these are some, pretty technological type skills, but it's skills that are forming a lot of the business opportunities and the business basis, how companies are changing their approach to the marketplace and how consumers are approaching companies. So it's just really fundamental.
Peter, there are a number of ways this can be addressed, of course. Local universities, in-house corporate training programs, as well as exchange programs. And LASPO has been doing this for a long time. I think sort of now is sort of beginning to realize the potential. It's beginning to get a lot more known, in part because of the 100,000 strong program, the Science Without Borders program. Give us a sense of what LASPO has done and how it fits into this one component of exchanges.
Sure, Chris. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. I'm also would like to introduce the chair of the board of LASPO, Jeff Kobernus, who is here with us today. LASPO is a not-for-profit organization affiliated with Harvard University. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary, having been founded in 1964. Our goal is to strengthen higher education in Latin America and the Caribbean. Over time, we've done this through the administration of scholarships for largely students from the region to U.S. universities, but also to universities in other countries. We work with over 200 universities in the United States who receive these scholars. We've worked with scholarship programs such as the Fulbright program, the scholarship program of the OES, scholarship programs from different governments in the region, including, as Chris mentioned, the Science Without Borders program of the Brazilian government, which we are administering the PhD program at U.S. universities for. LASPO also does short-term programs. We design and carry out these programs aimed at improving the quality of teaching and learning in the region, in promoting academic innovation at the higher education level. We're particularly interested in promoting the quality of STEM education in Latin America and the Caribbean, science, technology, engineering, and math, English teaching in the region, and are looking for ways to improve the link between the quality of education that high school or that future high school teachers get at the universities and the university teaching that they receive to generate a stronger multiplier effect. I think all of these are skills that are needed in the business sector and for national development in the region.
Give me 50 years, I didn't know it's been around that long, but give me a sense of sort of like how many people have passed through the program and sort of some of the highlights of people that have gone on to become engineers, doctors, presidents.
Over time, about 20,000 people have participated in programs administered or designed, carried out by LASPOW. Many of them are university professors. So if you look at universities in the region, you'll see lots of deans, some university rectors, department heads, professors. We also have a number of people who are working in the government sector, and of course lots of people in the private sector. It's a really very distinguished group, very, very varied, everything from ministers of state to university professors or business people. But this mix, I think, is important because what we are also trying to stimulate is greater synergy between the business community, universities, and government.
There's a great article that came out yesterday in Latin Vex by Adele Sanchez about the skills gap. And it talks about a recent McKinsey report that says one of the problems is that the private sector isn't communicating enough with the education sector and what they need. Sam, as a child of academics and as a brother of an academic as well, but now wearing your private sector hat, what's your view on that?
I think it's a fair observation. I think one of the challenges for the private sector is to really understand what those needs are in a changing environment. And for example, this notion as you train your future leaders, just the whole notion of what is learning and development and talent identification, high potential talent identification, and carving out channels to provide access for leaders on an inclusive basis. So this means identifying all future leaders, not only males from the dominant culture. So the change is inherent in identifying what are your needs, whether they're hard skills, technical skills, as was alluded to earlier, or softer skills around inclusiveness and sensitivity to cross-cultural dynamics. It means that the needs or the businesses are evolving so rapidly. They actually need academics to help them understand. Part of the challenge for academics is research-based means the world's moved on by the time you've done research. And the biggest problem for academics is they're providing insights on facts that are already well out of date. So there's a big mismatch. And I think the inability of academic institutions to be truly global completely hampers them. I will tell you, for example, in working with the best universities in the world to try and cobble together worldwide leadership development programs, it was impossible. There was no university that had a strength of presence to be able to deliver that around the world. You had to bring your people to one place, which meant it was not a truly global solution.
Was that bureaucratic inertia? I mean, I work in academia too, and it's like herding cats trying to work in academia. So is it just sort of the specific dynamics of academic institutions, or is it just a broader problem?
Yes, I would say it's the specific dynamics. Academic institutions are extremely entrenched in every country, in whether they're public or private, and tend to rest on the laurels of what they've achieved in a national market. As I said, they're very, and to the extent they're globally oriented, it's an openness and a receptiveness, but not a truly part of a global solution. Now they're moving in that direction. They're trying to move in that direction. But I think that's been part of the challenge to answer the question is private enterprise being clear about what are their changing needs, and they're struggling to digest those and understand again that some of the time-honored approaches need to be revisited. And for the academic institutions, they need to break out of a construct that's going to be difficult to break out of. And the other thing I would just add to this is the whole discussion of reform of education and the role of technology is another wave that's clearly coming that no one knows where that's going. And that could be a huge enabler to this, as technology has been and things like data have been, or it could be just an entirely new dynamic we don't understand yet. There are many unanswered issues here, but I would say that academic institutional entrenchment is very hard to break out of.
Liana, your views on this, and also sort of you're a global leader, so I'm curious your comparative perspective on how Latin America stacks up globally, if you can comment on that as well.
from a skills space, or, well,
If you want to trash academia, you can too.
no, I don't really want to do that. Will say, so a lot of our growth is in emerging markets or growth markets, and a lot of our skills, we do tend to revert back often to students from major market universities, because we find on average that they are bringing on the capabilities that we in the end are looking for. Now it's not a black and white issue though either, but as far as even when we have very high needs in other countries, including Brazil and other countries in Latin America, we still rely upon, well, we look broadly and globally for the talent, and it does happen that we do have found success in some of the major market universities. Now, some of that is students that come from Brazil and are getting their education at a school, perhaps in the U.S., and that's fantastic. But that's not always the case. So it is, again, it's not black and white, but those are some trends that we certainly have seen and have resulted in how we target and plan our strategy on what we need to do to find the talent.
Peter, I saw recently, and I can't remember the statistic. I won't try to make it up, but the earning potential, how it increases for someone who speaks English as another language. I'm curious sort of how you guys break out sort of, and what you do in terms of the sorts of skills that you're seeking to build now. Obviously, it's very STEM-based. And what does that mean in terms of also the directions that you'll be pushing a lot of your students and recruiting as well?
Well, the issue of English is vitally important for someone who is interested in first studying in the United States, obviously, and secondly, as a skill that is important in empowering someone to take a position in a globalized economy. And English is really a barrier. It's a major barrier to being able to realize some of these goals. It's a barrier that leads to, I think, a strengthening of the disparities between the different social groups in Latin America, the breach between the well-off and those who are not as fortunate. So one of the challenges that we face is trying to put into or build into or work with our sponsors to build into scholarship programs intensive English so that students can be brought up to a level sufficient to be able to carry out successfully graduate study in the United States. But I think more importantly, there needs to be an investment in the region in the preparation of university teachers who are in turn going to train high school and elementary school English teachers so that the general level of English can be brought up. Many countries talk about how they want to become bilingual, they want X number of percentage of their population to speak English. This requires a sustained investment. And the countries in Latin America are behind on English teaching. They really need to take that step.
That leads to a follow-up question. How do you, in these programs, and we had a great article in a previous issue of America's Quarterly by the current ambassador to Brazil, Tom Shannon, who went in depth about how you avoid that these scholarship programs don't just skim from the top, that you're not just taking the elite, but to say that it's not to be anti-elitist, I'm not about to go out myself and protest against the 1%, but that you don't, because there's automatically a structural bias. The people that go to better schools are going to be from better families, and they'll therefore have better English skills and have better skills in terms of being able to adapt at U.S. universities. How do you avoid that, and what sort of preparatory things can be done both by businesses and by local governments in these contexts to ensure that this is actually a ticket to greater social mobility? That's me. That's you.
We've carried out we've administered a number of programs that have been, along with the sponsors, focused on definitely non-elite groups in Latin America. And these programs almost invariably have contained a very large component of English teaching, perhaps up to 6 months of intensive English. But sometimes that's not even enough. What's needed, again, is that the students, as they come up through their own public schools, have access to some meaningful kind of language learning. There are other institutions in these societies, the binational centers that are affiliated with, that were in the past supported by the United States government. These are places where also students can learn English. But English really becomes a dividing line between the different social classes, and there's got to be a way of breaking that down in terms of opening opportunity up to less privileged groups.
And as you say, too, a lot of those programs were run before by what was then USIA, and they're now, I mean, it's been completely, our public diplomacy program has completely been defunded, and we've lost a lot of that ability to prepare those students and also people who will be good advocates for U.S. In their home countries. Which brings me to Diego, and again, not to turn him into the model here, but here we have one person who passed through last POW. Diego, just give me a sense of sort of what's your sense, your reflections on all this? The role of the private sector, the ability and the outreach of last POW to reach those things, and what you'll be doing when you go back to Colombia.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here. On one side, there's a sense there that Latin America is reaching a new opportunity. I think the new challenge, when everybody seems to acknowledge that the advancements in improving social and economic conditions in Latin America still faces the greatest challenge is the rural development gap. So how to solve that gap between the regions that have the less opportunities and young people in the regions that have less opportunities, and the fact that some of the emerging markets that we're talking about here and that the private sector in Latin America is advancing so much are in a lot in the majority of these sectors are based on environmental resources, energy-based, mining, environmental services, ecotourism, these kinds of things. Just brings to mind the idea that it's about time that addressing these skill gaps is done not just through the type of through a criteria that's based on the type of skills or the economic status, as we already mentioned here in this panel, but also based on closing that rural development gap and now actually creating opportunities at the rural levels and trying to strengthen the possibilities of people that are in these rural areas. I know there's a lot of, there's increasing programs that address these particular regions, and I think that you're doing a great job, institutions like LASPAO and others in this regard. Another thing that I wanted to mention is how this particular reality of how the market what's the profile of the market at this point relates to what's happening in the public sector in Latin America as well, because there are several studies that, although they do mention that when it comes to the wage differential between the private and the public sector, the average worker in the public sector makes more, has a higher wage than the average worker in the private sector. The relation changes when you go up the scale of higher educated people and more experienced people. So in a way, the market, the private sector is really becoming increasingly attractive for people that are highly trained for the public sector but are not finding enough spaces or profitability to develop their careers in the public sector. I think that's another issue. And when it comes to the types of criteria that a lot of these exchange program, training programs are incorporating, I think there's a lot more to be done, but we're doing a good job in terms of really insisting in this multiplying effect, if you will. Peter mentioned, for instance, training, the training of teachers and professors, but also a lot of efforts should be done. And in my particular experience, I apologize for referring to my own experience, but I think that's part of the point of this. Yes, So in my particular experience, I have been very fortunate to participate or to benefit from different training programs funded by the State Department, the OAS as well, a couple of grants from different universities in the U.S., Columbia University, National Defense University, Naval Postgraduate School, and every time when I had the opportunity to come, I made sure that when I went back to Columbia and to my workplace, all the people that had to do with these types of topics sort of had at least a chance to listen to what I did, the types of projects that I brought with me. We did special reports, special training sessions to have multipliers of all these types of activities and sort of increase or spread out the impact of these projects and not just have these projects become, or this cooperation become useful for one person in particular. And it's also, I think, a great opportunity when people come up to study in the U.S. or have the opportunity to start collaborating with higher education institutions here in the U.S. that we develop new initiatives and that we start linking and collaborating between the different networks and connections that are provided increasingly throughout these programs. Fulbright, LASPAO have very interesting opportunities to link alumni, to link current scholars into new initiatives that could eventually become also startup projects that they could bring back when they go back to their countries.
Okay, last question to all of you. Sort of the classic question by Lenin, what is to be done? We've talked about the lack of communication between the private sector and the public sector and university and education institutions, the lack of soft skills, which are sort of, I guess, from what I've heard, sort of underappreciated as a skill, the sort of bureaucratic inertia within public sectors, the rural-urban gap that Diego talked about. I know we, in America's Quarterly quite a few years ago, developed a child's chutes and ladders game based on basically regression models of social mobility in which we assigned to different slides or ladder lengths depending on regression coefficients to basically see what is the most important or damning thing in terms of social mobility and when a child is born in terms of their inability or the challenges in terms of getting ahead for the next generation. And actually they're being born in a rural area and being a girl. Being born a girl was sort of the biggest hindrance to actually getting ahead or achieving a level or status greater than their parents. So certainly the rural issue is very important. And then last is sort of recruitment. How do you recruit students that are not just the children elite, and how can you also build the soft skills of English, and then how can businesses better recruit? So let me start again with Sam. What would you recommend? You've got a...
I guess I'd start by saying the movement towards greater cooperation between the public sector and the private sector is very important in finding or evolving towards a series of things that will together represent a solution, because there are a number of things on your wish list there. And I think that phenomenon in and of itself is relatively new and not yet fully successful. So just recognizing that public-private partnerships aren't going to be necessary only for things like ports and roads, but also in this critical area of education is going to be a very important starting point. And then encouraging both innovation, but consistency and if you will, a broader shared platform. Because right now there's a tremendous, and you cited a number of them, tremendous number of successful and important initiatives, but together they don't add up to make enough of a difference. So you do have to see governments continue to address basic educational needs rurally and around English as a second language. And at the same time, you need higher education to be much more effective. And you have to have private employers continue to do better at understanding the biases in their focus and their selection processes and stretching themselves and doing more, as they're doing more already, but recognizing that contributing to communities through sustainability. And it's important to note that in Latin America, sustainability is not only kind of the green environmental, but is often associated with education and the development of people and inclusiveness. That agenda is not just altruism, but it's truly fundamental to good business results and citizenship. So I think that the answer can only be around continued and deeper collaboration between the private and public sectors. I would also love to see, and this is where the Council of Americas is so relevant, a greater focus on hemispheric cooperation. The North-South cooperation between North America, Central America, and South America is just not what it needs to be for this hemisphere to be competitive as we need to be in the future.
We're trying. Diana, what needs to be done? What can be done? What would you recommend?
I think I'll build off of the last comment. I use the term often, global mindset. And you mentioned recruiting, and in our recruiting activities, often we're looking for a global mindset of an individual. Well, I think that can be applied, as mentioned before, global mindset within a university, global mindset within a country. Not being so localized, although appreciating and understanding the local circumstances are important, but also balancing that with a broader global view as well. And so I think that's an important criteria for recruiting, but also just for planning and for being. Let's see here. I got a lot on that topic and lost what else I should talk about.
Well, some of the soft skills. You talked about the soft skills, yes. And it's that was a revelation to me, is the importance of what you look for. So how can you build those? What do you?
Well,
finishing school?
I'm sorry,
finishing school?
Finishing school. I think
for everyone, yes. So part of the point is some people think they arrive already finished, and the reality is it's for everyone.
And actually, it's ongoing school, probably, right? It's finishing school ever finished. Yes, I think the idea about starting very early. So in the discussion around English skills in elementary schools and preparing the teachers, I think that's a great idea, and that can apply to. I know the English skills are very critical here, but the same concept or approach could be applied to other soft skills or capabilities as well. Start early, and that would be important building blocks, regardless of where someone was born. So this will help to maybe address the rural versus non-rural areas, right? If you start the building blocks as early as possible, make it an even playing ground, then students can decide their pathway for reasons other than what circumstances they were born into. So,
Peter, 50 years is a good point to be reflective on last spell. What would you say, in terms of what you could do better, what the new generation of needs are, and how you think both the private sector and universities can better respond?
Well, everybody can do better. I think in the past people thought that access to education was the key. If students were able to go to primary or secondary school, that the inequalities in society would tend to evaporate. I think we're learning that what we're talking about is access to quality education and the promotion of quality learning all the way up and down the education chain is what is needed, and that requires an investment in innovation, in teaching and learning at every level. It implies much stronger preparation and selection and support for teachers at the primary and secondary school level, which means, of course, stronger programs to form these teachers at university levels. Much more emphasis on technical skills. Technical education is an area where there's got to be a lot more investment. As I said before, more investment on sciences, on STEM, on technology. As Sam was saying, greater synergy between the private sector and the public sector. These are all areas that require more attention. But again, it's to develop quality. If some students have access to quality education, others do not, the breach in society will continue to remain broad.
Just quickly, Diego, do you have any just a few reflections?
Yeah, I would just, two couple of things. One is referring to Sam's comment about the synergies between the private and public sector. I would just think that a good way of putting that to use is actually creating these sort of prospective regional and local science and technology agendas for the rural sector, so that the needs in terms of human resources are well targeted in terms of the particular development of these regions. And the second thing would be really to insist in the concept of creating more collaboration, more networks, and more tools that can address the traditional, let's say, brain drain sort of phenomenon in which high-skilled labor doesn't at least give back or contribute back to their own countries in Latin America.
Great. We have a question from the web, but Susan, I know you had a comment. So I'll give you.
I had two questions.
Go ahead.
One of them to you, Deanna, where you talk about technical skills, and I wonder, and computing and computer, and how much of that can really be applied to retraining, because I think that's a big opportunity as well, particularly in Latin America. And the second question I had is, when I was in Peru 2 weeks ago, Chris has heard this, I had an enormous opportunity to see Khan Academy in action with children that were, I guess they were in the equivalent of 7th grade, and they were doing Khan Academy math in English, and these were C's, C-, D+ kind of, educational or economic level. And some of the parents were paying up to 25% of their income to have these kids go to school. So what role do you see for Khan Academy and other programs like this in changing the quality and the depth and breadth of the education?
First off, on the first question on retraining, I think the basic question was, do I think that's possible? And I do. I do think it's possible. Of course, you have to have a well-established retraining program in place. Also, I think the participants, it's an important attribute, I think, is the ability, to have skills, but also the ability to change and evolve and develop new skills. So that's an employee trait, right? So it's a combination of the employee being able and willing to learn and to change, with the acknowledgement that this is where the world is going. I realize that I need to continue to develop, so there's a mindset around that. And then also, of course, a supporting curriculum or training materials that will then, enhance that interest and capabilities. But yes, fundamentally, I think that retraining is absolutely possible, and I think it's really critical. I mentioned at the start that things are changing so quickly that to keep up, we all have to retrain. So I guess, thank goodness, I think it's good or possible. Now, the Khan Academy, I'm not an expert on the Khan Academy, so it may be better addressed by others.
It was the most impressive thing I had ever seen.
Well, I can say that we have, my experiences, through exposure and, testing it out through my children. I think it is fantastic as well, but I don't have a deep knowledge about it, so I probably shouldn't comment further, although I think it's great from my exposure.
For-profit educational initiatives that are seeking to cater to sort of the base of the pyramid, if you will, that are innovative and interesting. Any comments on those?
I'll certainly comment. I think from a Latin American perspective overall, there's a long way to go. Education generally in Latin America, as Peter alluded to, is not accessible. It's the government's getting out of the business. The private educational systems are very expensive, disproportionately expensive, compared to other markets around the world. So that creates room for innovation. That's the good news, that is the market indicator that says innovators will be welcome and will disrupt a market that's tremendously inefficient like that. The challenge is scale. So while you'll see some initiatives highly effective like that, The question is, how can you raise a lot more boats and a lot more consistently and have people get value for the quality of education that they really seek? These are all, I wouldn't call them intractable problems, but I think the fact that the private sector is playing in the space is good, because innovation will produce some results. The question is, will it be fast enough and on a scale broad enough to make a difference?
I will say Khan Academy is the most scalable thing I have ever seen. It is totally scalable.
Okay. We had a question from a web viewer, Neil, from Northwestern. Outside of technical type roles, what are the types of jobs corporations are now transporting to Latin America? What are the job needs, job demands we're seeing in Latin America now?
I'm certainly happy to comment on that. As I alluded to earlier, I think it's not just transferring jobs to Latin America. Jobs in Latin America are growing from those markets intrinsically within their national borders and starting to emerge regionally and hemispherically. So in terms of the direct question, you know, global businesses or regional businesses investing in Latin America need their technical skills, need their business leadership skills, need people who've had not only the technical training, but have had the experiences to adapt and work in multiple environments. If they have language capabilities in Spanish and Portuguese, that's obviously extra helpful. But businesses are looking at global workforces and trying to prioritize that the people who are willing to be mobile are the people whose skills will be most relevant in the future. And that's a challenge, because mobility tends to be more expensive for businesses. It's harder to integrate people both on the inbound and the return side. So making that a reality rather than an empty promise is something businesses struggle with. But as I said, I think where the biggest growth in the job market is in these markets isn't on the multinationals investing in Latin America. Yes, they are, because it's a hot market. It's on the growth of the businesses in these markets. And frankly, surprisingly, the big businesses in Latin America tend to be family-dominated industrial complexes with strong links to the government. Whereas there a lot of growth is in the entrepreneurial sectors, and I think unlocking that innovation, and particularly the economic empowerment of women in Latin America, is tremendously underestimated and underemphasized by the governments. There's going to be tremendous growth in these national job opportunity markets.
Yourself? We've got a great mix before you do of educators, students, and businesses here, so it could be a good reflection.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Sergio Trindade. I'm an international consultant working globally out of New York. Mr. Fouad made a comment that the universities are a little bit behind the corporate world. I would say your insistence here in learning English also suggests that you are a little bit behind the learning of Putonghua or Mandarin or Chinese, because that suggests that perhaps the effort, some of that learning effort should be put to use in learning Putonghua. Now, I think the discussion here isn't very clear, because there are two lines here. One is corporate training, which sometimes is called corporate education, but it's basically training, providing skills, changing mindsets, and things like that. And on the other hand, we have real education programs. One is very short-term, corporate training skills. The other one is longer-term, and they don't need to have update solutions. They need to prepare the people to be able to respond, to have the skills to respond to whatever immediate problem is facing them. A thing I would like to also, talking about mindset, Ms. Laird emphasized mindset. I think it's fundamental. Just give you an example. In this country, and in English language, when you conclude a course, you call it commencement, which comes from the Latin, as you all know, meaning to begin, to start. And in our countries in the South, our neighbors in the South, they call it formatura, or closure, or end. So the mindset in an educational system where the conclusion of a course is the commencement of something versus the conclusion of a course being, you know, that's it. And the final comment, Mr. Chairman, if you allow me, is to say there was an emphasis on rural development here, with which I agree, but one has to realize that the area that we're talking about, Latin America, is highly urbanized. Most of the people in Latin America do not live in the countryside. Those who live in the countryside may not be doing very well, but majority live in the urban areas. And I would emphasize more the urban periphery that is suffering. These are the former rural dwellers who, moved to the city. So these are comments to steer some more discussion. Thank you.
It's a fair point, Sergio. Certainly, 80% of the population in Latin America lives in cities now, but cities in the broadest sense, as you say. Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Just to that point, and I want to follow up on some of the things that Peter said. I work with the LASPAO board. I'm on the LASPAO board. And to your point, I think that over almost 50 years, we have concentrated a lot of our resources and a lot of our scouting in areas outside the main city. A lot of Latin American countries, as you all know, are highly urbanized, and many of them have only one city. My experience happens to be in Peru, and there literally is really only one city in Peru, and everybody goes there. And we have, in that particular case, and this is true of other countries in which we've worked over the decades, we have concentrated a lot of our work in provincial universities and have made a major difference. And some of them have 30 or 40 people that we've trained over the years that are the deans and the professors and so on in technical areas, agriculture and what have you, that we believe, and we can't document this, probably has stemmed a little bit of the migration from the highlands and from the coast down to Lima, into Lima. And we'd like to think that business probably increasingly in Latin America is going to set up shop in factories and research stations and what have you outside the major cities in some of these countries. So that was just...
Thank you. Yes, my name is Tom Kadhal. I'm a syndicated columnist, also an entrepreneur of 20 years. And I've been looking at this subject quite a bit. I just finished writing an article on advanced manufacturing where I interviewed GE's Jeff Immelt. And I have to tell you, he's got a completely different view of what's been said here. And I'd like to share some of it in a constructive way. First of all, I also attended, I wrote an article in something that the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce had an event at the Harvard Club last year, and one of the mentions there by EMC is that their need is going to be 990,000 IT employees in the next 10 years. So you have to really think about that. That's a serious order. And for the fast food company we're running here today, I don't think we're going to make very many people happy if we only have 20,000 as an example. And I'm not belittling that by any means. But I'd like people to think about this as a value chain. There's just a lot of effort right now on improving one end, but forgetting that there's a huge bottleneck in the middle. And I want to identify that bottleneck. I was also up at MIT, and there I spent a lot of time up there. They work on a program called edX, edX.org, edx.org. It's similar to COM, but it's much more formal. You can take just about any course at MIT, and I know there's open course or whatever, they have some other things, but this one's really well organized. I've taken a few of their courses. You've got the best teachers. They've got a really easy way to follow that. You can, it goes week to week. They have exams and so forth. And their ideas are teaching, this one professor was teaching, say, 500 students at MIT, was now teaching 100,000 students, of which I think 20,000 graduated. Actually went through the entire program, got and all the requirements. Now you're looking at some interesting numbers. And so you have to say, what does that say about our educational system? How's that going to change that? Because really, the four-year college, I don't think makes any more sense, which is another argument that we had at MIT, not argue, it was a great discussion at MIT, where they're starting to talk about, how about a two-year college? And why? Well, in my estimation, and also from what I learned from Jeff Immelt, there's a need for two types of training. One is the skill sets that we talked about. But frankly, those things change so rapidly that it would probably make more sense to go to school for 2 years, go work, and come back, say, 2 years later and continue that skill set training. That's a more efficient way than going for 4 years, as we have them today, and then thinking that your degree is your ticket to something. And the second type of training, which I just don't hear much about, is training on the, and I did hear from the gentleman over here, which, and it was alluded to, is the ability to learn new concepts quickly. That's a type of education. And I think that has to get emphasized in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's perhaps where some of the, you're looking for students, all that effort you're doing, perhaps maybe we have to turn to our own educational system and say, we would like to see some courses of this sort. And let's say that they're entrenched, as we heard, and it's very hard to deal with them. Well, why not look at Latin America as a leapfrog opportunity? Why do we have to do exactly what we do in this country? Why can't we go down there and just do it differently? It's a great opportunity. You've got, to set up an organization of this sort, pilots of this sort, and I think you'll see some better results. And finally, I think I covered pretty much, oh yes, there's another bottleneck in the value system. That's HR. HR needs tremendous training because they are in the business, I don't know why, but they take a resume and they try to match it with a job description. It's like a puzzle piece. And if it doesn't fit, they discard it. Why can't we have HR people that can see that a particular skill could apply somewhere else, that a particular skill and experience combined with another team member could create some synergies that could actually create a better value?
Great.
Never hear that sort of thing.
Why don't we give the panel a chance to answer? You've got a lot here, which is, are we dealing with an outdated model here? Online education, how do you teach openness to concepts? Important issue. Can it be taught, actually, or is it just some sort of genetic gift some of us have and some of us don't? I still can't program parts of my computer, so I may not have it. And then the last is human resources. And Sam, that's sort of your bailiwick too. But let's start actually with Peter this time, and put you on the spot about the model of education.
Well, the gentleman was referring to the massive online courses, the MOOCs. edX is our online courses offered by MIT, Harvard, and other organizations in this consortium, other universities that reach out to as many as over 100, 200,000 students on a single course. To be able to profit from these, I would assume students need a certain level of background, and they need to speak English. So that's a start. You need good background to be able to profit from these. But the whole issue of online education is a reality, and that's one that's important in the mix that every organization is looking at. And in the future will only, I think, have a more prominent role. But for now, we're still in a world in which on-site education is extremely important. In terms of the peripheries versus the central cities, the ability to reach out to institutions outside of capital cities and to strengthen universities outside of capital cities is something that, as Jeff was saying, LASPO has been very much interested in providing opportunities on a regional basis as well as on a socioeconomic basis to promote diversity and to promote greater inclusiveness in societies. And there was another comment on concepts. Well, in terms of innovation, first of all, I don't think anybody's trying to impose a model an American model on anyone in Latin America. There are lots of models, and the work that we do, at least the programs that LASPO does, are trying to bring best practices to bear, regardless of where those models come from. But clearly, the rethinking of teaching and learning is something that is going on at a very fast pace in U.S. universities, and is something that is being taken very seriously in Latin America as well. And it's going to result in better results, better practices, but it's going to be a process that really requires some concentrated effort and a lot of investment.
Vienna, your thoughts on teaching concepts, the new education model, and human resources?
Okay, so well, I'll start with human resources. So I agree with the comments, and I will say that the idea or the goal is not lost on companies, or at least the companies I'm familiar with. And now, do we execute at a perfect level? No. But I will say that our goal in IBM, and it's particularly for university recruiting, which I'm particularly familiar with, we do look for skills, and the hard skills that we talked about earlier, but we also very much look for capabilities, because we know that we want to bring in individuals to our company, but not just for 1-2 years. We're looking at bringing someone into our company, ideally, and grow a career. And so, look, where can this person grow with us as we move, evolve as a company? We want this individual to move and evolve with us. And so, it's not just what is it that's on the table now, and what is your resume saying of what you have learned in the last few years, either at school or maybe through internships. But what is it that you're capable of learning and evolving and growing? So I guess that is not just a resume match to a job match, necessarily.
If you don't mind, the only response I have to that is the long-termness that you just mentioned is really like, don't take it the wrong way, it's an old school thinking. Things have really changed. People now are, and I'm wondering what is best for society, what's best for the individual, what's best for the company. Wouldn't it make sense to have people who only remain for 1, 2, 3 years and then they move on up or down the value chain of whatever career that they've selected?
Maybe. I don't know. And I think that, the long term, it was old school, but then in really the past 20 years, it's been very vogue to say, no, we're not with companies very long anymore. But I see, at least our goal is to kind of shift back. Look, we don't have to have a mindset where you only stay with a company 2 to 3 years. Why not? Look, the way it used to be, back to building a career with a company. I still think that that's a very viable model. We moved away from it, but I think there's potential to move back to it, especially if it's a partnership to where the employee is getting what he or she needs out of this growth and career development, and the company is getting as well. So a partnership there. So I guess I don't see it as a necessarily old school. I think it could be a very good equation that could work for us moving forward too.
Sam, you're the human resources.
Many things here, and I think the questions here live in this room are good questions, and I alluded to many of these challenges in some of the comments I made. What are the practical learnings from the business world that might be relevant here? First of all, with respect to things like online learning, what the business world has learned is that online learning is very difficult to measure its effectiveness. It is most effective when delivered just in time for a skill that's needed for a particular task rather than broad-based skills development or learning. So you will have seen businesses, and I've been part of one, that move to generate better financial performance by cutting a huge amount of the classroom learning and shifting as much as possible to web-based learning, and found that that learning, when tested, was not as effective. And you need people to have interaction and classroom interaction. So some combination, or being very clear about what are the delivery mechanisms and the measurements, and that'll be the challenge for online learning en masse. And that is the learning from business, is that some balance, and getting that balance right is where we need to go. I think with respect to the point around innovation, agility and adaptability is a critical skill. Bottling that, defining it, teaching it is still a journey that academia is on and business is on. Everybody suddenly values innovation and adaptability, but defining it and finding a way to teach it and measure it is still much ground to be covered there. In terms of HR, I would say, like any part of businesses, HR is a part of business organizations, whether you talk about finance or the technology group. Without getting into the business side of operations, HR is going through radical transformations to be relevant to the business strategy, to separate strategic business partnering and advice from functional performance in technology and being globally consistent. So no question, HR or parts of organizations are going through huge transformations to be more relevant and be able to deliver against these new paradigms and challenges. I think the amazing thing we're seeing is that, again, some of the truths we've held self-evident, that things that began in the United States or Western Europe and therefore are going to migrate and be the right solutions, are things we're seeing, you know, challenges come, and not just from China. For a while we thought the solution was going to be Chinese, we'll all speak Chinese. That's no longer as clear. And as somebody who's worked closely with Chinese businesses and government results, I think that's open to a lot of debate. And the question is, what will emerge? And can Latin America, and we see examples, whether it's the Anheuser-Busch walking around management model as a new management model that's in vogue, what will emerge, and what can Latin America contribute to this dialogue and effective performance is something that I think, as you suggested, sir, perhaps there's untapped potential here, and we can, using the technology, the telephone paradigm, you know, not bother with landlines, but go straight to mobile technology.
Question from Twitter, just want to ask it. In light of the challenges for girls/women, what can be done to improve opportunities for girls and women for governments and organizations? Any ideas, specifically on the gender issue? Peter.
I'll jump on that, particularly as a man. And let me say this about you know, gender, which is a subset of the broader issue around inclusiveness. Effectiveness, whether it's on the public or the private side today, demands that institutions understand that inclusiveness is an imperative to successful results and performance. And the first part of this is defining what is inclusiveness. It is your mix, and the mix is often underrepresented in terms of gender, but it's not limited to gender. It could be other issues around ethnicity or religion or many other characteristics of human beings. So the first issue is what's your mix, and the second is making the mix work. And about making the mix work, it's about understanding what are the biases that make it hard, in the case of this question, for women to have an opportunity to advance equally. And I think for women specifically, it is the one issue that is common across all geographies. So whether you're in Saudi Arabia and you can explain that, yes, the starting point is different, or here in the United States where the starting point is different, the fact is everybody has that issue to do better on, amongst others. And I think that what has to happen in Latin America is a recognition that there are many role models and many mentoring components that are important to getting this right, and there's a long way to go.
I would like to answer it as a woman, please, if I may.
Panel, it wasn't posed to you.
But I am a woman.
Yeah, there are other women here. Just by virtue of being a woman doesn't entitle you to answer questions that's not been posed to you.
I understand that, but I have a very relevant point to make.
Any other panelists want to answer?
I agree with the comments
That
that,
would be nice.
yeah, I agree with your comments, and I'm fine. We can.
She's not
Can
going to
move.
make it.
Okay. Did you want to say anything about?
Only that the LASPOW scholarships we're currently administering are about 50-50 in terms of men and women. And I know that the sponsors of these scholarships are very interested in making sure that there's good gender balance. And it'll be interesting to see too if the number of women in the sciences grows in Latin America. And as we see the Science Without Borders program that we're administering, that's something we'll be tracking with much interest as well.
Yes. Now you may ask a question, and just don't get to randomly answer one.
Excuse me, I'd like to answer. I'm Dr. Polner. I'm president of Cinema Verite International, Inc. I was sent by the United States government to work in Siberia to help develop educational television. Educational television is incredibly relevant for reaching into practically, I don't know how many homes. I ended up making films on children in China who can speak English and are learning English at a very early age, as well as under my company, films in Eastern Europe, as well as in Russia, all on children learning English. So one of the major ways to get into many of the poor homes many of which have television, is start developing educational programming. And I don't understand why that hasn't been suggested or developed personally. I would personally love to help develop it. And anybody interested in all my educational films made in those companies, my website is www.challengingfilm.com. Thank you, Mr. Sabatini, and my doctorate's from Columbia, where you teach.
I would only comment, I think the technology is the issue you're alluding to, and technology in Latin America specifically is far behind other markets in terms of availability of technology for students to access. So you're suggesting, I think rightly, that television might be a technology more readily available today in parts of Latin America. I think it is a medium that should be leveraged, as you suggested, and the challenge is around the future and providing more technology, because computer-based, the convergence of technologies is obvious in other parts of the world, and Latin America lags behind in terms of that availability for its population.
But to be quite frank, the problem also is the fragmentation of media as well. As we have a lot more options, as good as documentaries can be, there is sort of this fragmentation of media that makes opportunities available for e-education, but also sort of fragment the opportunities to be able to get eyeballs on a particular message.
And as we've alluded to, availability is fantastic if we can encourage it, but measuring results and measuring, and again, here I'm going to pick on HR again a little bit, because we talk about competencies, and organizations and businesses went very far around defining what competencies, both hard competencies and soft competencies, and those may do a disservice to people who, as Deanna said, have tremendous learning capability or potential, but maybe haven't had a chance to evolve as far. So identifying potential, which is increasingly available around testing, but eventually this becomes human. But I think this issue of accessibility is to be encouraged for the reasons that our guest is suggesting. But again, being clear about what is measurable progress is the challenge for both academia and business in these paradigms.
Great. Let's collect the last round of questions. We had a whole bunch here, so just go around, and then one giant paroxysm of answering, we'll answer them all.
Hi, I'm Carmen Orcos with Empower the Emerging Markets Group. And my question goes to more about how to be inclusive, especially for more bottom of the pyramid, the populations in the peripheries, and women and girls. So what we found is when we support local organizations focused on youth, is that to really address the skills gap as much as we support technical training, because we focus a lot on the technical aspects here, is we keep facing the social issues. So whether it's violence, it's drugs, it's gangs, it's abuse, a lot of these other social issues that come into play, especially in those areas. And if we don't address those, then we can never get the full potential of the young people that we're working with. So what do you see is the role of that in what you're talking about? And is that the role of the nonprofit sector to take over because the government's not doing a good job of it? The universities or a lot of the schools are not doing it. They don't have the quality. So how do you see that fitting into all of this?
Good question.
Yes, my name is Teodelina Basavilbaso. I'm a journalist from La Nación newspaper. Well, you have been talking about the skill gap of Latin America as a whole, and I wanted to know if you see a difference between each country, the countries of Latin America, and in Argentina in particular.
A partial question, a sense of parcialista. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Christopher March, and I work with the Costa Rica Foreign Trade Office. My question is directed to Mr. Bustamante. You already talked about being born and how that affects basically your opportunities during your life. I want to see if we can focus a bit more of where you study independently of your skills. Like, how does that affect your outturn or whatever? How much does your country of studies affect your global career opportunities, and if that acts as a barrier to the 1%, even in those Latin American countries? Like, if you study in any of them, you got the best education there, but once you're off college, how does that affect being a global a professional and not being only from that country, like only in the station companies in that place.
Any more questions to the left? Okay, let's go. Well, Peter, we ended with you on the first round. We're gonna actually we ended with Diego, so actually I'm gonna have Diego answer first, and then we'll go Peter, Diana, and Sam.
Well, thank you. First I want to see if I got the question straight. What you're asking is, do I see that there's any particular restriction or limit or difference after you go out of your higher education, depending on the country that you're coming from or this economic status that you're coming from in your own country? Is that?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe in your case you did your undergrad in Colombia.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
like maybe, like in your case, before moving to the States and your peers down in Colombia, like what's their real opportunities outside of Colombia once you finish your degree over there?
Okay, thank you. Well, I definitely feel that there is a difference that the market values in terms of the international experience. You are having more and more high quality higher education, in particular case in Colombia, also directly offered in the country. So, but I feel that the international market is definitely valuing international education on one hand, and the other thing that comes to play, and this touches a little bit on what our guest was saying, is the different structures of the education system that also create certain, I don't know if they're exactly barriers, but there are definitely differences. For instance, the majority of programs in Colombia have a 5-year duration in college, and people also are more accustomed to gain more professional experience before they go to graduate school. So that creates a certain distortion when it comes to the international mobility of human resources, because you have normally the Chinese coming into college. I'm just putting examples here, but coming to college at really, really young ages. Then this is just my perception, and there's probably the Americans that are more and more inclined to go into graduate school right after their college or have shorter programs and so forth. And then you have Middle Eastern and Latin Americans coming out of graduate education at older in a way. So that can also create a distortion when it comes to the international mobility in the labor market.
Right.
On the issue of the link between social issues and economic development, education, security that was raised, it sort of becomes an environment, a package that improvements in one can help lead to improvements in another, and generally the approach to these issues needs to be holistic. Education in and of itself won't resolve all of these other problems, and oftentimes when one gets better, the others will improve. But the approach to dealing with education and to really unlock the capabilities or the potential for education, you do need security. You need children to be healthy to be able to get the most out of their education, and so they need to be approached in a holistic manner. The question about differences in education in the different countries in the region, clearly there are differences in terms traditionally of access to education, the availability of public education, the quality of public education over time. But there are also similar challenges. The phenomenon of the massification of higher education, the explosion of the numbers of centers of higher education throughout Latin America underscores the need for quality to catch up with the numbers, I think in just about every country. So there are important goals, objectives, metas, desafíos that the countries have to come to terms with in terms of the quality of higher education.
Diana, I want to hear what you have to say about Argentina too. How it compares.
So in response to your question, the problem is I don't have the facts or the information to be able to respond directly today. Now, I don't want to leave your question unanswered, though, so what I could promise you is if we connect, and I can try to find out what I can. I just don't have the facts to be able to answer it factually right now, so I apologize for that on your question. In regards to your question, though, I was thinking the same thing about in an environment an educational environment is to be productive. I think people need to feel safe, or if you have these competing concerns and distractions, then of course I don't think that your education results are going to be as strong. So those competing issues that you bring, which are very serious issues, will certainly have an impact on the ability. Now, I think you asked whose responsibility is it to solve them, right? Well, it's the particular issues that you mentioned are very complex. So, we mentioned a lot about collaboration, and I think here, it's a combination of it's family matters, it's life matters of how you grow up, it's public matters of the living arrangements and societal arrangements, and then also I think if you look at this as a cycle, as educational standards or capabilities increase, then will that as a byproduct reduce the situations that you raised, right? So what are the underlying reasons of why there may be violence or drug problems, right? Is it perhaps partially because of lack of success and because of lack of education? And I would think that there could be a connection there. So as the education increases, will it, as a byproduct, solve some of the other societal issues that you mentioned also, right?
I agree with what my panelists have said. I guess what I would add on the first question around getting groups who are underrepresented to be able to move ahead, I think the business world has found a couple of things. One is it's fine to continue to encourage separate groups who need to gain more access, and yet you need to treat them together as groups that need to be supported. Now, how to do that, some of it is around mentoring from mentors who've had success coming from their own background, but then going beyond that and providing them mentoring and support from those who are already the privileged. So I think there's both in the case of women, for example. They need to have women mentors as role models, but then they also need to have mentors who are leaders in the organization who may not be women, or leaders in the community to also mentor them and provide them access to networks that they might not otherwise have. So that's a bit of the response beyond, I thought, the fine points made around the interdependencies of who has to help. On the question of relative developments across Latin America, I would say we've highlighted how Latin America in general is underinvesting in education, particularly on the public side. The challenges, some progress is being made, but the challenges are great. The private is engaging. It's too expensive for most families. Maybe innovation will be part of the solution. I think it's a momentum game, to answer your question, and if you pin me down on Argentina, I would contrast Argentina and Colombia. Colombia, a country with a tremendous tradition of excellent education, but some huge challenges in their socioeconomic environment that kept a cap on that, and that's been broken through by solving the challenges of narco-traffic challenges as well as the socio-military challenges that the country had, and that's unlocking a huge potential that we're seeing. If you contrast that with Argentina, a country also with a tremendous tradition around excellent education and tremendous talent in the workforce, and yet the government's current policies, I would say, are populist in nature and not about integrating with the global economy and working closely with the private and public sector partnerships, to put it as objectively as I can. And I think that's putting a cap on the ability of the Argentine people to access the marketplace, both in Argentina and abroad.
Can I just add one thing and note to that, because this is not to be an apologist for the government. Well, what is curious is the number of investors that have chosen to make Argentina their regional hub, whether it's Google or Microsoft, despite whatever the government may be doing. It sort of speaks to sort of the talent,
absolutely,
and the long tail of talent.
As long as you're Google, you don't have to import computers, you're fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so the talent's clearly there in the case of Argentina, and the question is, you know, how can that be sustained, or are the people being served by the long-term educational and economic policies of the government? To the gentleman's question for Diego, what I advise students and mentors that I work with is, interestingly, it has been the goal. I was not born in this country, but it has been our goal, most of us, to say if I could get an education in the U.S. or Europe, and certainly for Latins who had access, that was historically the objective. What I would say is the experience you could gain from becoming a leader in a Colombia or a Brazil today and being successful in those environments, and not necessarily working for an inbound business like an IBM or an Ernst & Young, but perhaps working for a Cerrejón or you know, an EPM in Colombia, or you know, a fast-growing enterprise like Brazil Foods that's becoming a global player, is you'll get experience coming from these markets that are now major players that are going to be perhaps as relevant or more relevant, even though not yet internationally recognized. And I think that's something that probably we don't yet know how to anticipate or weigh, but I think that's starting to get into the conversation.
On that positive note, I'm going to end what I think was a very rich discussion about sort of a very problematic issue. It clearly has its roots in the structure of education and employment and investment and even sort of public policies and sort of social inequalities, as Diego talked about. But I think what you're seeing is a growing recognition of it. I mentioned the article that came out in Latinvex, which I think, and the McKinsey report that's also on it. So clearly, this is getting attention, and I think it's sort of, hopefully, we'll begin to hear about much more collaboration between the public and private sectors and the educational and private sectors in this. So let me first of all say that our panelists each get a going away gift, a parting gift of our copy of America's Quarterly. I will warn them, there is an article on the Keystone Pipeline, so don't show it to the protesters outside on your way out. You could get eviscerated by a man dressed as a seal, and there is one out there, I hear. And then please join me in thanking our panelists for being here for lunch.